So that was ethical reasoning. The next one that I'm going to discuss is narrative reasoning. And Hardy says, we dream in narrative, daydream in narrative, remember, anticipate, hope, despair, believe, doubt, plan, revise, criticize, construct, gossip, learn, and love by narrative. So basically what Hardy was trying to put across there is that almost everything that we do, there is a narrative attached to it. But what is a narrative? In simple terms, narrative simply means story. So in occupational therapy, we use narrative reasoning to make sense of people's particular circumstances. Our service users, for us to get an understanding of their circumstances, we actually make use of narrative reasoning. We use also narrative reasoning to prospectively imagine the effects of illness or disability or injury or occupational performance problems on the daily lives of our service users. We can also use narrative reasoning to create a collaborative story that is enacted with the clients and families through the therapeutic process. This is why occupational therapy, in terms of narrative reasoning, is also considered to be a life editing process, because the clients or service users are coming with their story at one point in their life where they need occupational therapy, and the intervention from the occupational therapist will alter their story in one way or another. So that's life editing. The forms of narrative reasoning that we can find, there are basically two. The first one is storytelling, looking at occupational therapists trying to understand the client's story. So it's narrative, it's storytelling that we are using. We also use storytelling when we are telling the story of our clients to each other as OTs or to the MDT members. So that's one way. And then the other form is story making or story creating, whereby occupational therapists help clients to recreate their future stories during the therapeutic process. We can also use story making in actually creating new occupational stories with our service users. Franks in 1995 proposed three types of narratives that we will typically find when working with people. So the first type is called transitory, where an individual views their illness or their situation which is impacting on their occupational engagement, occupational performance. They consider it to be temporary, and they are looking forward to restitution or restoration of their usual daily occupations. So that's one type. That's the transitory type of narrative. And then there is the chaos narrative. The chaos narrative is where the service user takes a hopeless stance. They consider that nothing will ever be better. They feel that they are not in control and that nobody else is in control. So that's another type of narrative which could be sometimes challenging to work with when we're working with service users. And then there is also the quest narrative. For the quest narrative, you'll find that this is when the service users consider the illness that they are having or the injury that they might be having or the situation that they are having, which is preventing them from performing their meaningful occupations. They consider those to be challenges that need to be conquered. So they are considering their life as a journey that they need to conquer. So anything that is coming in their way, they are motivated to conquer it. So that's the quest narrative. So understanding these types of narratives is important for us. Imagine when you're assessing an individual or a service user, if you are able to identify what type of narrative they are in, then it will help you make decisions in accordance to the needs of that particular narrative. So in narrative reasoning, the most important thing is really to get the story right. because when you're going then to make the decisions, you're going to make the decisions based on what the client has said or is saying. So getting the story right involves being very clear on what the person's story life is like. Who is the person as an occupational being? How has their health or circumstances impacted on their ability to continue with their daily occupations? What occupations are most important or meaningful to this person? So getting answers on these aspects will really help us to use narrative reasoning in our decision making about the assessments that we're going to use, about the interventions that we're going to provide to our service users. The techniques that we use in interviewing our service users, they need to help us to gather information, uh, a clear story, a full story. If you think of the different occupational therapy conceptual models, models like the CAWA, the MOHO, CMOP-E, they are models that can actually help us to gather the right information, to get the story right, to get the occupational narrative from our clients. So for every story, there are 7 elements. The first element is the actor or the actors. So who is the client? And who are the other people involved around this client in terms of the occupations that they engage in? The second element is the plot. Is this a quest narrative? Is this a chaos narrative? Is this a transitory narrative? Is this like an adventure? Is this like a doom and gloom story? So there is a plot for every narrative. There's also drama and suspense, and there's also action in terms of what is actually happening um, in the story. There is an aspect of chronology. What is happening? One event happening after the other. So over the time, how have things been happening? And then the sixth element of every story is the trouble. So usually at that point, that's the point when people are referred for occupational therapy because they're having some problems with their occupational engagement and they need occupational therapy intervention. And then the last or the final element of every story is the moral of the story or the lesson from the story. Generally, it's about making sense of the whole experience. How does the service user make sense of the whole experience that they are going through? Narrative reasoning, it has got its own challenges as well as merits. So some of the challenges of narrative reasoning relate to power issues, like who is the expert. So in terms of narrative reasoning, the client is actually the expert of their own life. They know their life much better, and they know the condition that they are experiencing and how it's affecting them in a better way. But at the same time, occupational therapists also have good expertise in understanding conditions and occupational performance. So there sometimes could be issues with power issues. Narrative reasoning is also very subjective, it's based on what the client or service user is saying. So it can be biased. There is lack of evidence. It's just the client's words or the client's perceptions, really. Sometimes some clients may give narratives that have got conflicting ideas, which might make things a bit complex for the therapist. So it will be important for the therapist to keep on going back and forth until they actually get the story right. The other challenge is that it takes time to get a person's full story, considering that therapy contexts, they've got time limits in terms of how many minutes a therapist needs to spend with a client. So the available or allocated time might not be enough for the therapist to actually get a full or clear story, narrative, occupational narrative from the service user. There are also merits for using this type of reasoning. Stories are used naturally, so it will be easier for the service user to actually convey their story. Storytelling bridges the client's past to the present and also brings therapy into the client's life. So narrative reasoning enables us to actually put the past into perspective, as well as to use that information from the past to address the present situation, as well as to plan for the future that the client is hoping for or is anticipating for. So story making helps structure and guide our interventions. And also with narrative reasoning, it tends to motivate clients to edit and revise their life stories. Imagine a client coming with a chaotic narrative through the therapeutic process that can actually be resolved into a positive outcome. And this is why narrative reasoning is typically considered to be a life editing process, because it's a person's story that is going on. They have come to OT at one point in their life. The OT's input will hopefully make things better for the service user. So it's considered to be a life editing process when we're looking at narrative reasoning. Okay, these are the references that some of the references that I've used. And thank you so much.